it on my phone if there's good service in here. Ask your texts.
Not well on our stage.
Hey David, how are you?
Okay, this is Rob. We're at Busboys and Poets on 14th Street in Washington, D.C. This is 10 years later. Still shocked, not awed. The speaker tonight will be David Swanson. You see that? And this is about the Iraq War. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the Iraq War. Leah Bolger, very well-known activist. I believe she was a colonel. Who else? Jocelyn Raddick, John Carricou's attorney. She has also helped out a lot with Bradley Manning coverage. She will be speaking tonight. When I first smoke, I'll be back tonight. I think it's in there. Yeah, I'm connected. What up? Just sells basketball.
I know.
Yeah.
Right now it says it doesn't exist.
Back there. It's again a smaller school.
I'll send pictures and the live stream.
Okay, I'll give you a card.
How do you say?
We have a new project now. We have a new project now called Creating America. It's sort of a sequel to 95 Years of Liberty, except we're looking at racial and political division on the national scale, shifting it back to the source and going into the details.
Tell you that, according to CPAC, that's the source.
They are exploiting those old wounds from the Civil War and prolonging the division. That's definitely true. But we want to deal with them, but we also want to try to deal with some of the hurts and some of the alienation in the South that they're doing as well. And I like to clear we don't just say stop beating your wife, we like go back to what happened to you as a child to make you,
Today is Baltimore. I've been reporting on Baltimore since I live in Baltimore. And that would be a really good area to start. I mean, it's poverty and racialism that is the culture of the wealthy white people just the impoverished. The contrast, there's a contrast of overlooking just boys out Roosevelt. It's just stunning.
right in the middle because
the stage, ready to go.
Okay. You have the hot spot though.
I have it, it's in here.
And my phone just keeps switching back and forth between HD wireless and that's it.
Everything that's not goes over there.
Good evening. Good evening. Hello.
Good evening.
My name is Robert Shetterly. I live on the coast of Maine, and for the last 11 years and 2 months I've been painting a series of portraits that I call Americans Who Tell the Truth. And one reason we're here this evening is to unveil a new portrait of David Swanson. And we'll be doing that in a little bit. That's what there are now 190 portraits in this series, and they travel to museums, colleges, libraries, schools, community centers all over the United States, and gives me an opportunity to talk a lot about history, ethics, and the meaning of citizenship. This project, my project, began, well, sort of in a way right after 9/11. As I'm sure everybody in this room is very well aware that within days, rhetoric was coming out of this government talking about why we needed to attack Iraq. And I live in this little tiny village on the coast of Maine, and I've been an artist for a long time, never a portrait painter. And I was thinking, what can I do at this moment to feel less angry, less grief-struck about where we're going, and also find some way to feel not so alienated from our country, and also as though I feel I have a voice at this moment. And I also knew that it would not serve me or anyone else well if I just used my anger to guide me about what to do. That somehow I had to take the energy from that anger and use it in the service of compassion and do something positive with it. And it took me months to figure out what to do, and then in the end it was something very simple. It was to start to surround myself with people from this country that I admired instead of obsessing about the people who were causing me such distress. And so I painted Frederick Douglass, and I painted Susan B. Anthony, and I painted Walt Whitman. And it never occurred to me that I would actually keep doing this because I had a life. I mean, I was supporting a family by doing other kinds of art. But the more I did it, the better I felt about what I was doing. And then I began to realize that I couldn't not do it. And I also knew that I couldn't sell these paintings, that they were, the people I was painting were people who had given too much to all of us in this country for me to capitalize on their images. And if I went on, I was going to have to eventually give the whole thing away. And then I decided, well, I'll call this Americans Who Tell the Truth, and I'll paint 50 portraits, even though I had no idea whom I would paint. And then I will eventually just give this whole thing away. Well, now there are almost 190, and it's gone way beyond anything I would have ever dreamed. I'm going to introduce our speakers here this evening. Each of us is going to talk a little bit. This is Leah Bolger. There's David. There's Andy Shallal. And at the end of it, we will hope there'll be a discussion. I will field questions, and anyone up here will be happy to try to answer them. So the first, I think that's where we're going to start, is I'm going to introduce Leah. And after she has had something to say, then Andy's going to speak, and then David and I are going to unveil these portraits, and then he is going to speak. Leah Bolger was for 20 years in the Navy, a commander. She's retired now, and she is most recently the most recent past president of Veterans for Peace, and she is. And she is an extraordinary peace activist and peacemaker.
Thank you.
I'm more comfortable standing than sitting, so I'm going to stand. I'm actually more comfortable with the lectern to hide my notes and stand behind, but I feel kind of naked out here in front of you. I'm sure there's a friendly audience, though, and you won't give me a hard time if I refer to my notes. So I do really feel honored to be here. When you look at the 4 people who are speaking tonight, and the purpose of our event here is to unveil this portrait. So of course, Rob has to be here because he painted it, and David has to be here because it's his picture, and Andy owns the place, so why am I here? So I really feel very honored that David asked me to come speak and be a part of this special evening to honor him. And to honor the work of Rob too. I think this is it's a self-fulfilling honor kind of thing that you are honoring David, and David does the work that it just sort of perpetuates itself. So when I agreed, though, to speak, I said, as long as I don't have to follow David, because if you've ever heard David speak, he is a fantastic speaker. And I did follow him on Inauguration Day. I was up here, and we were protesting drones, and David spoke first. And then Jean Athey spoke, and Jean said everything I was going to say, and David had already said everything that both of us were going to say. And so then I got up there, and and then so David asked me to speak, and I said I would love to. And I thought, I was going to talk about how great David is, and I was happy to do that because I think he's a wonderful person, and I have a lot of nice things to say about him. And then I saw that where he was starting to advertise the event, and it's about Iraq and the 10th anniversary of the Iraq War, and he was planning on speaking about Iraq. And I thought, well, oh gosh, does he expect me to talk about Iraq too? And I asked him, and he said, well, I said, I was planning on talking about you. And he said, well, I'm sure not going to talk about me. So he used this opportunity as the activist he is, to take this opportunity. It's supposed to be a night to honor him, but to talk about issues, real issues, things that are important to us. And so David's going to be talking about Iraq, and I'm going to let him do that. I'm not going to talk about Iraq. I am going to talk about how wonderful David is. So I first met David, I believe, it was at Camp Democracy. Does anybody here go to Camp Democracy? Ah, yay, a handful. So Camp Democracy was this wonderful idea that we were going to have a month-long series of events that every day was a different, or every week was a different theme with the environment and peace and justice and different groups, Code Pink and Veterans for Peace. I was a fairly new member of Veterans for Peace at the time, and I came thinking that I was just going to be attending these workshops and listening to speakers and being a guest at this month-long series of wonderful events. Howard Zinn was there, Jeff Cohn was there, Medea, of course, is everywhere. But one of the people who was organizing Camp Democracy was David Swanson, and he was the communications guy, and he would work tirelessly sending out press releases and trying to get media attention and writing articles, and that's where I met him, doing what he does best, writing and communicating. That's what his background is. He's done a number of things in his life, and he's good at all of them. I wonder what he puts on his tax return and occupation job, because he is a writer, he is an activist, he is a radio show host, he is a philosopher, he is a blogger, what else? Father, and I consider him a mentor and a friend, and a really special person. So we worked together at Camp Democracy, and it turned out they really needed a little help, so I got involved in organizing Camp Democracy, and Veterans for Peace got involved. And although the Camp Democracy didn't turn out to be exactly what we had hoped, we didn't have the attendance that we had hoped, I made a lot of great contacts there, and it really kind of got me kick-started into activism. And David's one of the people I met, Medea's one of the people I met, and I really kind of launched my career with Veterans for Peace there. Since then, I've become a member of the board of directors and then the president, And then one of the major things I did when I was the president, I like to take credit for, is that I urged our executive director to hire David. So he is also now an employee of Veterans for Peace, and as well as a member of Veterans for Peace. He's an associate member, as is Rob Shetterly. And what about you, Andy? Are you a member of Veterans for Peace?
I think I might be.
I think you better be. We're going to get you to join. You're not. I'm also proud to say that many members of Veterans for Peace have been painted by Rob as well. And Wright, Medea Benjamin is a lifetime member of Veterans for Peace. Howard Zinn, the late great Ann Wright. Yeah, a lot of VFP members have been painted by Rob. So what? Pardon me? I thought I heard something. A question. So David and I go way back. We've been arrested together. We have done Occupy together. We have written together, collaborated together. He is a much faster writer than I am. He's a faster writer than anybody is. I remember we were both going to submit a draft, and before I practically hung up the phone, he was sending me his copy. But we have collaborated together. He is a very sharp wit, and when you read his books, you can almost hear his voice, because he writes as he speaks. Very, very witty and sharp, intelligent work. It really gets to the truth of things. He's written several books. He is a radio host on Talk Nation Radio. I've been interviewed by him. I've done panel discussions with him. I've been side by side with him in the trenches. He is a man who actually, he doesn't just talk the talk. He walks the walk as well. And one of his reviews on Daybreak, his first book, Daybreak, The Undoing of the Imperial Presidency and Forming a More Perfect Union, which I think you shortened to Daybreak very quickly after. He learned that, and his next book was called War is a Lie, and he learned it, and shorter is probably better, our titles. But this is Glenn Greenwald, another famous and incredible activist, writer, journalist, wrote this about Daybreak. Swanson's book is far more uplifting and inspiring than virtually any other book in its genre, as it devotes itself to laying out a detailed plan for how American citizens, through the activism to which he has devoted himself, can bring about a rejuvenation of our political values. And that's it. He's an action man. He doesn't just talk about things. He lays out exactly how we can change things, and he sees through the trappings and the rhetoric and the obfuscation that the government is. His second book, which was War is a Lie. This is a little bit of a longer quote, but I think this is a good quote. And many people, if you go to his website, War is a Crime, you will see, when you look at the reviews of his books, many people have written so favorably about David and the work that he's done. Many famous people: Tom Hartman, Jeff Cohen, Cornel West, Kathy Kelly, John Nichols, Bruce Fine, Norman Solomon. Just a veritable who's who of activists and writers and intellectuals have very high praise for David. And this is from a quote by Steve Cobble, who wrote, and this is talking about War is a Lie, his second book. Decisions to go to war were really made on the basis of reason and facts, rather than greed and power. David Swanson's brilliant new book would put a stop to them. Those of us who know David understand that he writes quickly and eloquently, speaks honestly and powerfully, and follows a logical point all the way to its conclusion. He has a philosopher's mind with a computer's precision, and he always maintains a justifiable moral outrage at the lies of the war criminals, calling out their crimes, detailing their carnage, poking holes in their excuses. Reading War is a Lie is like reading Mark Twain's war prayer, only in book form. So that's just one of many reviews. David is admired and loved by all who know him, and if you haven't read his books, you need to. And you can buy them tonight, and I'm sure David will sign them for you. But it's knowing David is like knowing a resource, an historical resource an activist without compare, and I am proud to know him and call him my friend and mentor. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Leah. It occurred to me that I should read the list of sponsors of tonight's event before I turn this over to Andy. And they are: War is a Crime, Roots Action, World Can't Wait, Voices for Creative Nonviolence, Veterans for Peace, Peace Action, Montgomery, Occupy Washington, D.C., Code Pink, Americans Who Tell the Truth, Busboys and Poets, Teaching for Change, Choices, Committee for High School Options and Information on Careers, Education, and Self-Improvement, Fellowship of Reconciliation, Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, Washington Peace Center, National Campaign for Nonviolent Resistance, Pax Christi, Metro DC, Baltimore, Coffee Party, and Liberty Tree Foundation. Wow. A lot of friends. Thank you all very much if you're part of those groups and in support of this event. Our next speaker is Andy Shallal. I think it's absolutely extraordinary when someone can create a space like this that enables people like us, to get together and have events like this, to feel less alone in the world and to think about what we're going to do next. And I think the vision that created a space like this is just a gift. And I want to thank Andy, as I'm sure you all have and do, for making this possible. He's also, besides creating Busboys and Poets, he's also an activist and a supporter of many great humanitarian causes, and he's also on a number of boards, including the Institute for Policy Studies. So,
thank you so much, Robert. A compliment like that from an artist is really well received. My best compliments would come from an artist. Thank you so much.
Compliment your art.
Right. I wanted to, of course, remind everyone this is the 10th anniversary of the war in Iraq, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this unveiling thing today. And for someone who comes from that part of the world, I had expected to be in Iraq this year because I didn't want to go and witness the 10 years.
Could I remind everybody, when did it start, in 91?
Well, I mean, there's been many wars against Iraq. You're absolutely right. But I had hoped to go, and so I have just a handful of relatives really left in Iraq at this point. And I called my aunt, who had always lived there through thick and thin, and she said, "This is not a good time to come." And this is 10 years after the war, and I've been trying to go there almost every other year to try to make it at some point. And every time I've come there, her first thing is, "Please don't come now." And it's not just, I think, for my sake, but also for their sake, because oftentimes when people come from outside, it creates a different dynamic for the people in there, and may even create some harm to them. So I respect her opinion very much so, and I did not go. And one of the reasons this time that I didn't go was because the sectarian violence has really flared up to an untenable level. It's been pretty awful in there, with constant protests and rioting, and suicide bombings are on the rise, and all kinds of things are happening there where people are just very, very angry and very upset at the way things are going. So I wanted to be here because I wanted to be among people that get it, among people that really care still today, 10 years after. And no one to me really represents that more than David Swanson, because he is an activist. He's one of those people that I think oftentimes when you feel a sense of despair, there's that email that comes through and it's got chock full of information and chock full of tidbits that you can actually use when you're discussing these issues with others. So I wanted to be here because, as Howard Zinn one time said, he said, when we asked him, what makes you so hopeful? What makes you always have a smile on your face when you're walking? And one of the things that he said is he always tries to focus on the small victories, the victories that have made an impact and change throughout history. There are people like David Swanson, who constantly is there, even in the moments of despair, in the moments where everybody's giving up. He keeps that little fire going, and then we are all the better for it, and all of us want to get up and get started again. So I want to really pay a tribute and a special thank you to you, David. Really, this is a war that's illegitimate. It's an illegal war. It's a war that was based on lies, obviously from the beginning. We were told that there'd be weapons of mass destruction, and we all knew that they weren't. We all knew that was a pretext. We all knew that there was no links with 9/11. We all knew that there was no links with Al-Qaeda. We all knew all of these things. And yet, these people that were in power, these war criminals that are still walking freely, are still calling the shots at some level. And it's shocking to me to see that people like Bradley Manning and John Kiriakou are in jail, while people like George Bush and Rumsfeld and Cheney are walking around continuing their bullshit over and over and over again, even today on television. It's really quite disturbing to see how that works out. These talking heads that keep coming back again and again, having been so wrong for so long, it's just really quite shocking. Yesterday I was watching the MSNBC show, and what's his name? Dennis Ross is giving us his thoughts about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, this jerk has been in that field for over 25 years and has been just perpetuating this nonsense for all of these years, and he continues to give nonsense to people, and he gets airtime. What is that all about? It's really quite disturbing. They asked me a question, and they said, well, is Iraq better off today? And I would say very, very forcefully that Iraq is not better off today than it was 10 years ago. And that's a pretty damning statement, because 10 years ago, Iraq was probably at its lowest point in modern history, in modern Iraqi history. This is a country that had gone through a few decades of dictatorship. It's a country that had gone through an 8-year war with Iran that just devastated it. It's a country that went through the Gulf War, and the Gulf War just decimated infrastructure, and a country that went through 10 years of sanctions, the deadliest and worst sanctions of any population on earth. For 10 years, people suffered every single day. We had to constantly send money to family because they couldn't survive. And these are people that are doctors and lawyers and people that are the middle class of Iraq. So when we went into this war, with I guess some people at some point thought maybe this might be a bitter pill to swallow, that things are going to get better. Things did not get better. Many of us on this side know that war never makes things better. And as we talk about sanctions, the sanctions are the equivalent of carpet bombing. They are there to destroy the population. The government doesn't get destroyed, the population gets destroyed whenever there's sanctions. So as these talking heads again get up and so casually say, well, no, we shouldn't attack Iran right now, we should just impose sanctions and strengthen them. My wife happens to be Iranian, and we have relatives in Iran as well. And they tell us what the sanctions do. They don't weaken the government. They only weaken the most vulnerable. Women, children, the poor. The middle class has been, in Iraq, for instance, has been completely decimated. Everyone has left who's able to leave. Really, everyone who's able to leave. I can tell you, of all my relatives, the only people that are still behind are the people that had no other choice. Either they had a medical practice maybe, that they had to stay back there, and they couldn't really find any other alternatives anywhere else, or they were too elderly to be able to leave. those are the people that are still left behind. So the situation has only gotten worse. There are over 3 million internally displaced people. These are people that have no homes to go to, that have to live in shelters sometimes. Those are the most vulnerable again. People that don't have a roof over their head, that don't have any security, that don't have food, that don't have resources and sources of things that make any human being live. People are not interested in democracy unless they have something to eat. You first have to give people the option to eat. Under Saddam Hussein, people had rations at least. There was food, there was some shelter. This is not an endorsement of Saddam Hussein, because he was one of the reasons why my family had to move here. But it is still, when we say that things are worse off today than they were there, that's a pretty tall order and a pretty horrible thing to say. There are over 1 million people outside of, in the surrounding countryside of Iraq. Many of them are in Amman, Jordan. Many of them were in Syria. And now with the Syrian civil war, many of them have been even displaced one more time, staying in refugee camps. Again, being much, much more vulnerable and unable to get home because of the conditions that are there. Iraq has been divided and subdivided into thin layers of ethnic and religious divisions that had never, in the history of Iraq, been there. And I'm saying never. Families intermarried constantly in Iraq. We didn't know who was Shia and who was Sunni. We really did not. No one talked about it. It wasn't an issue. Many families were mixed, only to find out that later, during this war, that even families that are married between Sunni and Shia, they've had to split up because the Sunni husband can't stay with the Shia wife for fear that somebody is going to hurt the family. So he has to move back to his Sunni neighborhood, which never really existed, but now has formed. Every area has become an enclave. And in fact, when I talked to my aunt, she said, you won't recognize the country. One of the reasons why we recognize it is because every neighborhood has checkpoints and walls around it. People have to go through checkpoints to get to their home. And if you're not of a certain ethnicity, and the guy who's standing at the checkpoint is of a different ethnicity, you're in big trouble. One of our relatives said that he went to the checkpoint, and he was Sunni. And the guy said to him, I know who you are, I know where you're from. He knew that he was Sunni. He said, I won't let you in until you kiss my hand and kiss my shoes. So it's that type of stuff, the constant humiliation that people have to go through, the constant struggle they have to go through just to get by on their day-to-day life. There's food now in Iraq, but food is very expensive. It's very hard for the average family to be able to buy food from the grocery stores in Iraq. But money is plentiful, except it's going to the people that are in power. It's like a gold rush. These people came into power. There's so much money. Iraq brings in $100 billion a year just in oil revenues alone. And there's nothing to show for it. Today, there's still no electricity in Baghdad, a very well-developed city. Everyone has a generator. When we talk to my aunt, you hear the whirring of the generators in the background. It's really quite disturbing to see it. There have been millions of dollars spent on projects, U.S. projects, U.S.-sponsored projects, that end up just sitting half unfinished. One of the biggest sources of development now is building prisons. The prison system is abysmal, and a lot of the protests and the anxiety that has been created in the population is the abuses that are going on in the prison systems. Women being raped, men being held without any kind of due process, horrible conditions that were there under Saddam Hussein and probably have gotten worse. because now they're just random. They're not even for political reasons or specific, but really just random things just to humiliate and upset a population. So the prognosis for Iraq does not look that hopeful, unfortunately. It's going to be a lot more years. And I was looking, we're actually thinking about doing this event that we're still in the process of honing and refining, but at the end of this month, we're talking with Michael Moore actually to do some readings of the pundits of what they said 10 years ago about the war. So it should be, if it's going to happen, you'll all know about it right away. But we're talking about, I was reading something from David Brooks. I mean, if it wasn't so sad, it's funny. Really, just to hear what they say and the things they say. They've been running a lot of little clips from Cheney and from Bush about how this war was going to end so quickly, how it's going to be so cheap, how it's going to be so easy, how we're going to be liberated with candy and flowers and all of this. And none of it has come to fruition. None of that. Iraq was going through dips and valleys. At the beginning, there was some changes happening, but they quickly slid very, very quickly back because the way we entered the war was wrong. The way we set ourselves up was wrong. And that's why you cannot create a right by bringing in a wrong. It just doesn't work that way. The process you use to get there has to be legitimate. Otherwise, you will never be able to maintain any kind of legitimacy, any kind of control, any kind of credibility within the population. The population realizes that. They've seen the United States do this before.